You were promised liberation. You got readiness scores. Awaken became optimize, macros measured, sleep staged, sunlight timed, cold exposure charted, breath boxed, mind tracked. The ring on your finger hums like a tiny oracle and tells you when to be a person. The pitch is mercy. Less pain, more clarity, but the mood is panic masked as precision. If I can tune the body to perfect signal, perhaps the existential noise will stay. Because by the end of this, you'll be able to smell the difference between wisdom and latency, between a vow that risks you and a dashboard that farms you. Let's offend our idols cleanly. The Buddha's scandal was not optimization, it was renunciation, stepping off the treadmill of more, better, next. Biohacking is asceticism's mirror with a Bluetooth halo, same appetite for control, new aesthetic of performance serenity. The monk says, enough. The optimizer says, almost. Almost is an empire. Almost sells bands, labs, stacks, clinics. Almost promises that if we nail the protocol, the ache will blink first. I'm not sneering at instruments. Numbers can be kind. They can spare a heart, a liver, a night. But when numbers become cosmology, the body becomes a project you must win before you are allowed to love it. That is not body love. It is a polite form of war. Buddhism names the war grasping. Biohacking renames it gain. Gain is grasping with a TED mic and a wait list. It makes the same bargain. Relief now, dependence later, then sublimates the terror into a clean UI. Optimization flirts with metaphysics by accident. HRV becomes karma with decimals. Glycogen becomes samsara you can carb cycle out of. Processing trauma becomes HR, hormonal regulation, instead of harm plus repair. It looks scientific because it prints graphs. It feels spiritual because it whispers the sentence every frightened animal longs to hear. If you try hard enough, nothing bad will be able to surprise you. That sentence is theology. Its God is control. So ask the heretic's question. What if the spiritual panic behind optimization is not fear of death, but fear of unoptimized love? Love that arrives on days your score is low. Love that chooses you when your metrics say not recommended. Love that does not scale and will never integrate with your API Buddhism calls that compassion and refuses to benchmark it because benchmarking would humiliate the truth it protects. I am not against a cold plunge. I am against escalation disguised as care, the treadmill of edges and stacks that makes you a lab for your own abandonment. The monk abandons what can't be kept. The hacker abandons what can't be perfected. One ends a war, the other installs better artillery. You feel calmer, the war is simply quieter. Stay. You will not be handed techniques. You will be handed a mirror. Golden bowl glow versus neon syringe. Robe versus ring. Vow versus variable. If your piece requires a firmware update to survive, you have not met peace. You have met a product. Numbers are not evil. They are obedient. Ask them for sleep, and they will count. Ask them for meaning, and they will counterfeit. Metric mirages begin when we confuse measurement with mandate. The graph says you, and we answer Amen. Buddhism proposes a different discipline, observation that doesn't enthrone the observer. Biohacking can mutate into the opposite, observation that enthrones the instrument. The ring does not merely mirror, it authorizes It praises on Tuesday and excommunicates on Thursday. Objective, we boast, pointing at the dashboards as if they absolved us of superstition. But objectivity at the scale of a wristband is an affection, a device trained on population priors performing statistical intimacy that can be useful. It cannot be ultimate. Ultimate is what you smuggle in when you start making life decisions in submission to a number that cannot name nouns. Who you harmed, who you owe, who will be unsafe if you keep worshipping your regimen instead of your relationships. The seduction of metrics is not just precision, it is progress. The graph implies a telos, up and to the right. Buddhism breaks the spine of that arrow. Dukkha is not a bug in the self you can patch with light exposure and magnesium. It is a law of contingency. To call it a bug is to rebrand our shared wound as a user error. The market loves user errors. It sells updates. Watch how quickly the language of quant becomes catechism. How was your day becomes what did your readout say? Do you rest becomes what's your recovery? Do you listen becomes are you compliant? We borrowed clinical speech to police ourselves and called the policing care. Meanwhile, the truths that build safety, dates, budgets, boundaries are nowhere on your app. Optimization makes you fluent in self and mute about systems. Yes, metrics can alert us to edges we miss, the sleep debt betrayal, the cortisol creep, the appetites that announce their shape as symptoms. Buddhism is not allergic to data, it is allergic to delusion. Delusion here is the dream that what matters most can be extracted, externalized, and automated into a device that never asks anything of your courage. Numbers cannot teach you to lose correctly, to apologize, to age. They can only exhibit these as anomalies in a time series. The deepest harm is liturgical. Rituals teach bodies what to love. When the ritual is dawn data, night data, midday data, the love that grows is the love of legibility. Legibility is a vice in the spiritual life when it becomes a condition for affection. You become a person who cannot be chosen except by a readout. That is not choice. That is outsourcing. If you need a test, here is one you can hate. Imagine breaking your device and losing the last year of logs. If you feel that your life's meaning has been set back, you have been catechized by metrics. There is no shame. There is only a quiet bill. The years we did not spend learning to stand unmeasured before realities that will never render to a chart. Asceticism once sought to exhaust the tyranny of appetite by starving its theater. Biohacking seeks to optimize the theater. Better lights, cleaner script, tighter cues. Both can be disciplines. Both can decay into domination. Buddhism intervenes at the level of clinging. Biohacking often intervenes at the level of leverage. Torque the inputs until the outputs flatter the picture you need to believe. A project may be noble, a rehabilitation, a training, but a body as project subtly changes your metaphysics. I am the manager of an organism instead of I am an organism among organisms bound by kinship and debt. Management logic asks, what can I extract? Kinship asks, what can I forgive? Extraction will always outrun forgiveness in the short term. It will always humiliate you in the long term because wear and tear is not a bug, it is belonging. The project aesthetic also writes shame into the interface. Miss a protocol, lose a streak, and the mirror grows teeth. Shame is framed as motivation because it converts Buddhism names that cycle hungry ghosts, mouths that never get the calories of enough. Biohacking feeds them premium fuel and calls the sprint health sprint long enough, and everything that isn't sprinting starts to feel like betrayal. There are things only a protocol can do. There are things only a promise can do. A protocol can sharpen attention, buffer mood, stabilize terrain. A promise can hold you when attention and mood and terrain disobey. Optimization tends to fire promises quietly. You don't have time for loyalty that isn't aligned to your window. That sentence is an obituary for friendship. Critically, the project logic hides a politics. Bodies are individualized as problems, while the conditions that injure them, work rhythms, unsafe rooms, economic predation, escape instrumentation. We treat exhaustion as a personal protocol failure instead of a workplace design. We treat loneliness as insufficient self regulation instead of institutional neglect. The body as project scales because profit rides the misdiagnosis. If you want profanity that saves you, your body is not your project. Your body is your alibi, the evidence that you belong to a species that survives by care. Care means inefficiency. Care means suboptimal timing. Care means foregoing best practices because a child is crying, a neighbor is hungry, an elder is angry at the moon. Optimization cannot bless this without ceasing to be itself. So the question is not, should we intervene? It is, who is allowed to be inconvenient in your cosmos? If the answer is no one, not even me, you have made an altar to fragile control. It will shatter the day life arrives unscored. Optimization preaches relief, but its rhythm is warding. Ward off chaos, ward off fatigue, ward off mortality's arithmetic. This is not childish, it is human. What becomes spiritual panic is the insistence that the only tolerable life is one in which contingency has been fenced by procedure. The procedure can be beautiful: light, air, salt, motion. But the aversion is still metaphysical, a cosmology in which surprise is profanity. Buddhism's insult is to declare surprise sovereign. Impermanence is not a risk to be mitigated, it is the law under which mercy becomes possible. Mercy presumes interruption, your plan wrecked by someone else's life. The optimized life tolerates interruption only if it can be gamified into resilience. Resilience is fine. But when resilience replaces restitution, we have converted ethics into athletics. Panic wears the smile of mastery. It loves control's sister, purity. I don't eat that, don't touch that, don't enter that, don't listen to that. Buddhism respects discipline while distrusting purity because purity calcifies into caste, not only social, but ontological. The saved versus the unregulated biohacking can resurrect caste with stainless steel. The unregulated are irresponsible, toxic, non-compliant, low energy. The priestly class becomes those whose labs trend up surplus control needs liturgy. It invents a weekday calendar of absolutions and a weekend calendar of confessions to the camera. I fell off. Fell off what? A cliff you erected. The camera forgives. The audience forgives. But the one you abandoned for the cliff may not. This is the simple, savage, ethical fact. Control scales. Repair does not. Spiritual panic chooses what scales and calls the lost maturity. Optimization also whispers an ontological slur against grief. that grief is a failure of inputs. Buddhism breaks that slur. Grief is what love looks like when its object is not present. You cannot supplement your way out of a missing person. You can make your nervous system walk more safely through the valley. But if you believe your valley is a lab error, you will curse being every time you feel when panic is named gentleness returns without sugar. The gentleness we need is not a downshift in tempo. It is the end of the enchantment in which survival can be settled by protocol. Protocol can help you sleep. It cannot give your neighbor bread. Systems do that. Vows do that. Rooms with tedious minutes do that. Spiritual panic will always prefer an ice bath to a bylaw because water doesn't argue, people do. The optimizer treats pain as debuggable. Locate the fault, patch the stack, update the firmware, resume performance. The monk treats pain as teacher, not because suffering is holy, but because our reactions to it reveal the contracts we signed with control. These are different ontologies that share a gym and diverge at midnight. One believes that enough iteration will eliminate contingent misery. The other believes that iteration masks the constitutive dimension of loss. The hacker's triumphs are real, knots that yield to nutrients, insomnia that bows to light, anxiety that relents when sugar does. But the triumphs create theological overreach, a mood in which all distress is presumed to be tractable by input hygiene. Those who still hurt become suspicious, non-compliant, dramatic, placebo-laden, low agency. Buddhism refuses that shaming because it sees the share of pain that belongs to no one's fault and to everyone's fate. In that refusal lies the second offense. Without techniques, what remains? Names. Naming who was harmed, who must repair, what pattern is design, not accident. The hacker's vocabulary struggles here. Its nouns are mostly molecules and minutes. It mistrusts the heavy words, grief, class, power, betrayal. Because they cannot be resolved by self-regulation, they summon the collective, which breaks the lab wall. We should note a darker harmony. Capitalism loves both the monk and the hacker, but it can sell the hacker more. The monk subtracts, the hacker accumulates data, gadgets, subscriptions. Pain as bug is commerce ready. Pain as law is insubordinate to the store. The store will thus curate your feed so that the monk appears only as aesthetic while the hacker arrives as solution. Buddhism's contribution is not anti-solution, it is anti-confusion. Its cleanest sentence here is brutal. Some pains do not end. They ripen into capacities, tenderness, vigilance, refusal to collude. This is not romance. It is an ethics of being with. You aren't failing because the ache returns. You are participating in a species that knows mourning. The hacker's theology cannot say this without collapsing its sales funnel. If you must keep a single distinction sharp, the hacker hates mystery because mystery defeats planning. The monk hates mystification because mystification is how power hides its bills. Pain sits between them and asks, "Can you love me without solving me? And can you expose who profits when I am unsolved?" Only one of these is a supplement. The other is a sentence you say in public. Biohacking at scale is not a hobby. It is an industry. Clinic chic fonts, laboratory thumbnails, sacred minimalism with NFC. It borrows the saffron palette to signal purity and the silicon palette to signal power. Between them lies a contract. We will sell you to yourself as a prototype forever. Prototypes never rest. they iterate. The market's genius is to discover your holy shame, the particular way you feel like a failure when you are merely alive, and give it a shopping list. You don't feel like you belong? Here is a quantified belonging that requires only money and discipline. You don't feel like you can stand uncertainty? Here is a device that will lie down under the weight of your fear and murmur percentages until you sleep. You will sleep. The world that made you afraid will stay open for business. This is not conspiracy, it is compatibility. A civilization that treats beings as throughput will prefer a spirituality that can be integrated with throughput. The Buddha's scandal, not owning, not hoarding, not racing, is anti-throughput. It will be exhibited, not adopted. The biohacking gospel, own, hoard, race, but do it clean, is Throughput's favorite hymn, watch the condescension creep in. Toward the unoptimized, the soft, the slow, the ones who refuse to metabolize themselves into units of edge, the market will preach kindness while practicing sorting. Everyone can start somewhere, it says, then sells you the kit you must buy to enter. The old initiation was vow, the new initiation is check out. There is a financial metaphysics at work. ROI becomes a way to launder value into the precincts where value never belonged. What is the return on a gaze you do not monetize? What is the return on an apology that shrinks your reach? What is the return on refusing to become an affiliate for your own life? If you can answer these in currency, you have already lost the measure that made life worth loss. The industry will keep inviting the robe to pose with the ring because the composite image prints trust. Trust is a convertible asset in attention markets. It liquidates nicely. Do not be shocked when the aesthetic of emptiness appears with discount codes. Aesthetic is a carrier oil. It can deliver either medicine or narcissism. The industry prefers whichever scales. Medicine doesn't, narcissism does. Optimization excels at routine. Liberation requires rooms. A room is tedious. Minutes, chairs, schedules, grievances that must be heard, budgets that must be read aloud, elders who contradict you on the record. A routine is elegant. The body surrenders to a tempo that never asks why. Elegance democratizes sanity. Good. But when elegance replaces covenant, power floats. The optimized self slides frictionlessly through the day while the unoptimized world eats someone else. Routines scale in solitude. Rooms scale through conflict. Conflict is expensive because it forces you to trade ideology for relief you can notice. A schedule changed, a person protected, a policy passed. The routine teaches you to breathe through the offense. The room teaches you to abolish it. One produces tolerance, the other produces teeth. Teeth are unsightly. They don't photograph well next to cedar and glass. Optimization is obsessed with self-governance. Rooms demand shared governance. Shared governance humiliates the fantasy that you can solve all important problems inside the temple of your physiology. It says the unsacred words quorum, vote, disclosure, audit. Biohacking cannot praise these without ceasing to be sexier than the town hall. That's why your feed gives you perfect mornings and no bylaws. In a room, you become free in a way metrics cannot track, not by reducing variance, but by redistributing burdens. The load shifts from the shoulders of the most compliant to the common purse. The optimized person appears less brilliant when others are sheltered. That is the point. Optimization wants you to shine. Liberation wants you to disappear at the right times so the room can endure. The last cruelty is aesthetic. Optimization makes virtue look like symmetry. Rooms make virtue look awkward. A famous person taking notes, a strong person saying, I was wrong, a punctual person waiting because a late bus dropped off a poorer student. Awkwardness is the trace of justice at work. If your virtue never looks awkward, you've built a heaven that requires hidden hands. What routine forgets to build, rooms remember, memory itself, the archive of receipts and apologies by which a house becomes safer than its slogans. A device will store your data forever and still not remember you. Memory is the thing people keep when you are too tired to keep yourself. We have walked the circuit. Golden bowl versus neon ring, vow versus variable, room versus routine, law versus patch. Nothing here forbids instruments. Everything here forbids idolatry, the worship of legibility where love should reign, the worship of control where wonder should stand, the worship of performance where freedom should scandalize the market into silence. You can keep your stacks. You cannot keep the lie that a stack can absolve you of being mortal and social at once. Choose a sentence to live under. The optimizer's sentence: with correct inputs, life will stop interrupting me. The Buddha's sentence: life is interruption, belonging is how we survive it. One will make you elegant and alone, networked and unheld, forever almost. The other will make you inconvenient and indebted, slower and safer to love. Do not pretend you can swear both oaths. Oaths that contradict each other produce burnout disguised as enlightenment. I will not sell you a refusal. I will name a cost. Freedom has a taste. It tastes like non-optimization at inconvenient hours. It tastes like breaking your schedule for a name that isn't your own. It tastes like letting a metric be wrong about you in public and refusing to correct it because correction would betray a human. These are not hacks. They are the ruins of control in which meaning builds a kitchen. You asked for provocation. Take it in the only register that explains what we keep losing. If your spirituality cannot survive an untracked day, it is not spirituality. It is a workflow with incense. If your compassion cannot survive a person who breaks your routine, it is not compassion, it is branding. If your peace cannot survive the disappearance of a device, it is not peace, it is customer retention. Pick your scandal. Mine is simple and signed. If your freedom fits inside a settings panel, it isn't freedom, it's performance tuning. I'm Silent Flame. Shatter the dashboard or stop saying the word liberation.